Good afternoon, everybody. We have three speakers this afternoon covering three very important topics. I'm sure that you would enjoy. I've gone through their qualification and certainly will be very, very proud to have such distinguished speakers. Our next speaker is Mr. Jeff Heller. He will speak about future sustainable urban design on large scale.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk about a project we're doing in the city of Guangzhou, which is about 9 square miles of urban redevelopment. And the thing about the approach we're taking there is I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from Mumbai. I came here a day early so that I could really get a sense of the place, and the thing that I get out of Mumbai is that it's, number one, is it's full of life and full of energy, and number two, that its streetscape and its landscape are in fact so intensely developed that there has to be a special way to treat it in the long term. And so hopefully there's lessons that I can transfer for Mumbai. So let's start out with just a quick review. You know, the Council on Tall Buildings is always trying to be on the edge of what the trends are, and the trends used to be very tall, exuberant buildings and all look at me without really paying attention to the landscape. And now we are, of course, talking about sustainability, which we should be talking about, but sometimes sustainability isn't just sustainability. And our fundamental principle is that sustainability and livability have to be linked together. Otherwise, you really don't have a sustainable future. So Shanghai was the first big symbol of sustainable development, and we're doing some work in Shanghai, and these are some photos of the Pudong taken from my attorney's office over a period of only three and a half years. And you can see this is the first shot, and here's the second, and here's the third. Over a very short period of time, the level of growth just continues unabated. And of course, the super towers at the core of it are being worked on, and Michael St. Pierre will talk about yet another one. So there's the challenges of the growth, and then the issue of livability and sustainability. Then in Dubai, of course, we all know about Dubai and Sheikh Mohammed, who is the central force behind that, and basically unlimited growth for a period of time here to create a city in the desert. But the one problem with creating the city in the desert, which is quite exciting and quite dramatic, is, and sometimes floats above the clouds, as I found from my room one day because of the weather phenomenon there, is that there's only one main road through the city, Sheikh Al Zayed Road, and the problem is that the buildings were getting built before the infrastructure and the city itself. And so what happens is that you have a place that you can't get around in to go to buildings that are quite dramatic to look at, but there's really no street life that's worth living. And it creates a lot of problems in the long term. And with the opening of the Burj Dubai, now renamed, they've achieved a great spectacle, and you know, here they even had people freebase jumping off of it at the opening, which is quite high in the air. But one of the issues that is a real thing is that in the exuberance of doing this, they never paid a lot of attention to how you get around. So you have Sheikh Al Zayed Road here, they have a loop road in here, and a road connecting over here, but this loop road is going to become like downtown Mumbai. It's never going to be able to handle the capacity of the area, and so they've borrowed into future problems because they didn't pay enough attention. At the Palm Island here, at least they have a people mover system, and just to conclude on this part quickly is that you know, this era where the buildings got wilder and wilder, competing for attention, all kind of wound up with a big collision that we've had recently. And the collision is basically a combination of primal forces, and they've changed the world. And the first force, of course, is the economic one. We finally got to the end of our rope of exuberance, and we ran out of money in most places. Not in China, not in other parts of Asia, which is a good thing, but even China had to dump billions and billions in order to work on infrastructure to keep things at a good pace. And they've actually succeeded quite well, I believe. And the next one, of course, is global warming, which everybody is talking about now, but the need to act is quite more dramatic than just the talk. And one good example of that is that you know, I think it's fabulous that China and India and places in Asia are succeeding and getting wealthy. And we're doing a lot of work in China. We've been there for 6 years. But wealth brings with it the ability to buy cars. So you've already got gridlock in both China and in India, and the pace of buying cars is only going up. So there are significant issues we got to talk about. At the same time, drinking water is going down. Water is a great issue in terms of consumable side, and it's a great issue on the business of water in the environment, and this is about sea rise, okay? So on one hand, we got too little water. On the other, we got too much water. And what's going to happen is that if we can't check sea rise, there have been many, many maps done now. This is San Francisco today, and this is San Francisco with about 2.5 to 3 meter level sea rise. And here's Mumbai with a high, you know, predictable sea rise. And you'll see that most of this part of Mumbai is all underwater. This is what happens after that happens. So we really need to address these things, but we need to address them in a way that keeps our cities livable and places that we want to be, okay? So at the end of the day, I mean, sustainable buildings alone are not enough to save the world. We have to develop, we have to develop policies and practice sustainability on an urban and on a regional basis. So just some of the points that need to be focused on about global warming is that the main cause is carbon monoxide, which creates the issue of the heating of the atmosphere, and that's all coming from cars, buildings, and other forms of activity in life. And the solutions are, you know, a series of elements which have to do with how we deal with these things, but what we can do as professionals is deal with the urban planning issues and smart growth and site planning, you know, and making smart plans, which I'll get into a bit, and then, you know, smart design in the buildings themselves. And these are the principles that we talk about. I'm going to be brief about these. But in terms of smart planning, transit-oriented development is really the main key to helping change the world, because what you have to do is get people out of cars. And the fundamental principle about getting people out of cars is convenience. If you don't have convenience in your transit systems, people won't get out of their cars. If people are in an hour-and-a-half traffic jam to go to the center of Mumbai from here, and there's a convenient way to do it, they'll do it if it saves time and it's convenient to access. So that is a critical piece, and I'll talk about that a little bit in the Guangzhou plan. Just in general terms, the number of cities that are engaged in America in green building programs and site planning is growing all the time, pardon me. And the number of people living in green cities, in cities with green policies is expanding all the time. And we need to do this as fast as we can. So let's talk about Guangzhou. Guangzhou is divided into two parts, north axis and south axis. We were invited by the mayor to work on the north axis of Guangzhou, he came to me and said they had a new plan, but he wasn't happy with the plan. It was not sustainable. It was more formalistic than sustainable. What could we do about that? And went to Guangzhou, and what did I see? I saw that cars have more importance than people, and so they're taking all their streets and they're putting dividers in them so that they improve the traffic flow, but it means that people can't get across the streets. And so what do? They have to jump over, the fences and so on. And they've done exactly the wrong thing, which is they keep trying to solve the car problem. And what I've told them, and what I would say here in Mumbai, the same thing, you cannot solve the car problem. You will never solve the car problem. It's only going to get worse, so you must solve it by thinking alternatively. So in Guangzhou, what they did was they just separated people from the street and made you go through pedestrian tunnels to get around. So we came back with a plan, and what we've said to them is the city plan has to be accessible. You have to be able to get around. It has to be livable. It has to be worth being there and making life better. It has to be sustainable, less energy. And then woven into that is the urban planning and architecture design. So you have to start really at the beginning and reconnect the city to nature as a fundamental principle, but you've really got to believe in that. I mean, you can't just say it. You have to believe in it. And in Guangzhou, water, nature, are the things that tie it together. The other thing is you have to give up the idea that cars are more important than people, and you have to make people and their getting around more important than cars. Easily said, but extremely hard to do. Extremely hard to do. And then, as Bernardo said, you have to deal with the heat island effect. Cities generate heat. Hot cities like Mumbai, like Guangzhou, generate heat, and if you don't do the right thing, you can see what happens, like in Bangkok, which I consider a failed city. They filled all the klangs, all the rivers, to make more land, to make more buildings. They cut down all the trees, and so now that city is probably about 25 degrees hotter than it was when I first did work there in the late 1970s. So there's a whole cycle of sustainable elements, and I'll talk about those in the plan itself. So the first part was this North Axis plan. And it starts at the railway station here, goes to the north part of the Pearl River and the new TV tower that Arup did. And the plan was kind of developed, but it was just another one of those plans that was divided into a series of places completely disconnected from each other. And so we took each of the districts and dealt with them one by one to reconnect the city together so that people could live and work and walk and get around without having all of the barriers that you get in a city that's really out of control. So the first thing was the surface connection. And we showed them an example, which is quite a good one. In San Francisco, we had the freeways done in the 50s and in the 60s. And the freeways cut up the city into bits and made it quite unpleasant and really reduced the quality of life. And they cut off our landmark buildings like the ferry building from the streetscape. And this was the whole idea decades ago of that the car is more important than the people. Well, we actually had a freeway revolt, and we stopped the freeways. I wasn't there, but we had a freeway revolt, and we stopped the freeways. And then I was active, as was several other, many other people, including my partner, in getting these things torn down. But it took the earthquake to tear them down, but we finally got them torn down. And we decided in San Francisco that people were, in fact, more important than cars. And guess what? We still have a surface road that works, and we've created all this green space and plaza and connected the city back to the waterfront, and it hasn't hurt the traffic at all. Didn't do a damn thing to make the traffic worse. Made it better. And it made our lives much better. And this is a great example. So and you know, other parks in the middle of the city. Boston did the same thing with the Big Dig. The Big Dig has had many technical problems, but it was the right thing to do. They took this freeway which killed the center of Boston, and tore it all out and created a linear park that connects the city back together. Okay, a huge, expensive project, but it showed what you should and could do. Now, what Mumbai has as an advantage is it didn't build any of these ridiculous freeways. So you got a good start. You don't have to undo, you know, a couple of decades of mistakes. You just have to do the right thing. And then, of course, Millennium Park in Boston, in Chicago, another wonderful spot. So, you know, we had to do some undoing in Guangzhou. And the first thing we had to do was connect the north part of the city and Yamling Park here to the railway station and the south part. And they have this big superhighway. They have the railroad lines. And the only way you could get from one part of town to the other was through a little tunnel underground that somebody charged a fee for, or you could take a car or a bus. So we said, let's make a great pedestrian bridge that links the north and the park, based on many models around the world, to the rest of the city to the south and the railway station, and make an elegant transition. Sorry, going a little too fast. So you know, we create this pedestrian bridge that links you to the railway station. And then the next part, we just moved from like the north to the south. The next part was the railway station itself. Somebody had the bright idea to create a plaza on top of the railway station so that the whole entry and exit, the major statement about getting into town is this big dark cavern of a place, which is, you know, as unpleasant and hot as it can be. And we said, well, you know, here's an example in Scotland, in Glasgow, of a railway station that's probably about 135 years old, all done in glass, and, you know, an example of the kind of thing you should do. So instead of having this giant nasty plaza that nobody uses with the heat bouncing off, creating more heat energy in the area, let's blow it out, create a photovoltaic glass ceiling that allows air to circulate, create a green roof here to absorb the heat, and take this and change it to that. So they're actually doing it. That's what I love about the Chinese. Okay, we did this about, I don't know, 7, 8 months ago. It's halfway done, and they'll have it ready for the Asia Games. It's really something. And then again, with the issue of the connectivity, speaking of the Asia Games, to the stadium, this is the, you know, here you are, the hardscape, you can't cross the road. And we said to them, look, you go into the park, and the temperature, as Bernardo mentioned in his example, the temperature under the trees, which, by the way, is where everybody is, right? They're all hanging out there. Why? It's because it's more than 20 degrees cooler than in the sun and on the pavement, and maybe 50 degrees cooler. And so you know, the greening of the cities is another extremely important lesson. It's probably more important than almost anything that's said at this entire conference. So we said, let's re-green the whole sports area. And this is the Tuileries in Paris, you know, and went through a process there. And then we had another road barrier moving, again, south of the sports center. And we said, let's change all that, make connectivity across the roads, and let's create an important node, which is the bus rapid transit station. Now, the plan was that they were going to put the BRT right on the surface and keep the road. We said, don't do that. Let the people be at the surface and cross the road and drop the whole road down and create this BRT transit below the level, and all the cars below the level, you know, just ramp the road down like this, and then people go up or down to the retail, et cetera. But it keeps the pedestrian connectivity along the axis without any barriers. And then we moved from there south to another major principle, I'd tell you, and that's preservation. You know, driving all around Mumbai yesterday, you know, there are a lot of really incredible older buildings. And as the values go up, a lot of those, the values go up, and if they're redone, the same thing. So the central axis, they're going to blow all these buildings out here. They're going to just tear them out and keep the axis going. So you don't have to do that. You don't have to rip out any of them. What you do is you create an urban experience through the existing buildings. There's plenty of room for it, and it'll be more interesting. And we said, look at Shenzhen in Shanghai. Shenzhen is this mix of new and old, where they've preserved older buildings in the center of the high-rise development and created a lake. And they've taken the older buildings and made high-end retail. And guess what? All of the buildings that they build around this preserved area are the most valuable buildings in Shanghai. So we said, just do the same thing here. And so what we're doing is we've planned through just a meandering way through the existing buildings. We've saved about, about 3,000 residential units in the process. So from that invitation, we then competed for the South Axis. In the South Axis competition, we won recently, and that goes to the next stage in Guangzhou, and it goes from the North Axis here all the way down and along the south edge of the Pearl River. And the same principles apply, which is, this is the North Axis here, this is the South Axis, is connectivity and sustainability and livability. And so what we did was we created a master plan strategy which is linking of all the landscape elements, both designed and natural, as the guiding way through the whole plan. So what you do is you read the coherence and the organization of the plan of the city of Guangzhou through its green spaces. And then everything else organizes around that. So we talked again about the sustainable principles of this organization and the creation of the greenways, both north-south and east-west, which link the city together but create real usable green spaces. And in terms of hydrology, there's a giant retention lake in the middle, which we create a park out of, but it's still a flood retention and water supply reserve. And it's linked into the whole landscape process. And then we get down to the south edge and we take the island that's there, it's kind of an industrial island, and make it into an ecological island with also some cultural buildings on it. So the whole plan for a distance of, by the way, about 7 miles is linked together in a way that you could actually follow it through. And the other process was the evaluation of existing buildings, what you keep, what you don't. Extremely important. And a unique thing in Guangzhou is the Guangzhou villages. These are actually the original villages that were the city, and they grew up in a very unusual way, kind of like some of the parts of Mumbai, where they have these building organizations, and the buildings are all cheek by jowl, just completely built out of control in the 60s and the 70s and even the early 80s. And part of the process, I mean, you know, there's like zero lot line on all 4 sides. And part of the process is what do we do with these villages and how do we relocate people sensitively while we do the redevelopment. So we've created a series of strategies for doing that as well. And organized our plan in terms of the various nodes of high-density urban and landscape areas. And this is actually another really important piece. This piece is about how do we create the density in an orderly way and a sustainable way. So the first thing we look at is the overlay of the grid of the subway system and where the stops are. And then the next thing we did was we proposed a light rail line. Okay, so we are bringing light rail. This will be the first major light rail system in China, reintroduced into China, and it will link the whole plan together and link the railway stations, the subways together. And the thing about light rail is it's less expensive, it's highly accessible. Remember, I talked about convenience and getting people out of cars, okay? And what you do is you can get out of a subway station, hop on a light rail, and the light rail stops easily every block or 2. So it makes it again so that given the traffic situations, you say, well, why would I bring a car when I can get around as easily as possible? And then the key to it is the nodes of the transportation system become the areas of highest density. That's what smart growth is really about. So you tailor the skyscape, you know, the skyline to the transit system, not the other way around. And in doing that, what you do is you create the ability to create very high density without any meaningful impact, as opposed to just kind of letting big buildings be wherever they want. So this density diagram falls out of that, and the land use pattern the same, and we can then work with the city to determine the ultimate area densities without any negative effect, because we just adjust the highest densities to be around the transit areas. So you start with your overall infrastructure plan, and you make that the basis for the planning process. And also the mix is extremely important, because in terms of livability, it's been also talked about that you have to have all kinds of uses: residential, office, commercial. So once we do all that, then you can start going back and looking at how you develop the tall buildings, where they should be, and linking the whole thing together in a coherent way. And we've done a couple of studies on some very tall, this is the TV tower, on some very tall residential towers by the river. And looked at how that fits into the whole cityscape. This is a little bit more on the transportation plan. How am I doing on time? Okay. You know, the whole idea of the light rail linking the city along treed boulevards, and then also discriminating carefully between the through roads and the local roads, so that the through roads don't disrupt the neighborhoods. That's another part of it, and relying much more on water transportation there, because you can do that in a great extent. And then also looking at pedestrian pathways, both for recreation and for moving around the city, and the kinds of paths and pedestrian bridges and things that will come out of that, and the places to go in the midst of the high density city area. So just quickly, and then I'll be done. Just so you know a little bit about us and the projects in terms of sustainability. This project in Emeryville, which follows all those principles, was the first LEED Platinum neighborhood design ND plan done. And we took a very traditional, sea of cars parked around a building and transformed that through a series of open space and other urban design sustainable principles into a real urban place with a lot of amenities. And so we were very pleased when this came out with the first platinum rating, which is the highest rating possible from the Green Building Institute. And then in San Francisco, this was kind of interesting. We did this building with KPF. This is an office building that, when construction had begun, they decided to make sustainable. We were actually able to transform it into a LEED Gold building while it was being built. And the important point about that is that it shows that doing sustainable buildings is not that hard, nor is it that expensive. It was not a big deal to get there. And that's one of the reasons I show this. And then we're doing a new tower near the Transamerica building, and the idea of this tower with the Transamerica, it's under the same ownership, that it's a green island, and not only do we do cogeneration and a lot of other sustainable things, but also we capture water on the block and put it in a cistern, and then that irrigates the park that's part of the plan. So the building is one that takes a twist and goes from a square to a circle, and part of doing that is it minimizes shadows and it minimizes wind and creates a very slender building that complements the Transamerica in form. And creates a more open park, and again, the water policy. And we've done some other tall buildings, which this one is mixed use. This is near the Trans Bay. This is residential over office. I think mixed use buildings are highly desirable in an urban setting, and because there's many cogenerative pieces to what you can do. And one thing we're doing here is that the glass is on a zigzag staggered, and what that does is it presents more of the metal to the sun as it goes around and shades the glass without creating any physical shading. So we actually achieve a 6% reduction of energy impact on the building by doing that. This is a building where we've got a historic landmark integrated into the building. This will be a LEED Platinum building actually for the EPA. So the historic building and the new buildings lobbies all integrate into one thing. And then in Shanghai, a building on a site on the river that is also the first, this is the first LEED Gold high-rise pre-certified or certified in Shanghai, and it's under construction, and the way it's achieved is that as you move around the building, as the sun moves around the building, then the character of the wall changes to minimize the impacts of solar loading on the building itself. So that's pretty much it, and I want to thank you very much. The one thing I would say, I've been thinking about what I saw and experienced yesterday and how do you do what you should do in Mumbai and move around and keep the quality of what Mumbai is about. And this is a little radical, but I have a feeling that something to be thought about here would be a very light structured monorail system that could get you from north to south, because I think that would go very well with the character of the place without heavy economic infrastructure burdens of subways and tunneling, although you probably need those ultimately. But there are a number of ways to sensitively handle Mumbai, I think, that would have immediate impact and could be done in a very low-cost way, relatively speaking, and bring the city towards connectivity and sustainability quickly. Thank you.